Oh man, I love this game. Achingly authentic 80s graphics, intoxicating difficulty, platforming and controls so tight they crackle, and an exploration-based level design that melds form and function so seamlessly it could have been made by Leonardo da Vinci. The winning game you have here is, of course, you have to win the game. No, I wasn't stuttering just now. You Have to Win the Game is the title of developer Pirate Hearts, also known as J. Kyle Pittman's, retro-style platform game from 2012. Now, broadly speaking, my intention with this channel is to cover hardware and software, both new and old, for old systems. However, despite its faithfully recreated vintage graphics and sound, You Have to Win the Game will only run on modern systems. Unless you're talking about the obscure Commodore 64 port, which is a strange choice of platform made for a game that looks like it belongs on an IBM compatible, but it's an absolutely amazing port nonetheless. Still, I feel justified in reviewing the original, not just because it looks and feels exactly like it belongs in the 80s, but for the more personal reason that it's largely, although not solely, responsible for my renewed interest in vintage computers. Just look at these graphics. They're just so evocative. Every pixel feels like it was deliberately placed, and it's dripping with significance and meaning. It's not just the hardware limitations of old PCs that Pittman's recreated, it's the whole aesthetic and zeitgeist. Every moment playing this feels like deja vu. In fact, when my partner saw me playing it, she even said, "Hey, I remember playing this when I was a kid." Yes, this game is pure distilled and concentrated nostalgia. One of its greatest achievements, at least from a technical standpoint, which really emphasizes this, is its famed CRT filter, which has been used by the developer in several titles since this one, including the sequel Super Win the Game. Now, there's CRT filters around for all sorts of emulators and the like, but they rarely go further than adding scan lines and maybe a little bit of color bleeding and artifacting. But the filter found here is just orders of magnitude beyond that. I could list all the features it has, but really just look at it. The only way you'll get this to look more like the real thing is to use an actual IBM 5153 monitor. Of course you can turn the CRT filter off, but why would you want to? Unless you're playing with an actual CRT screen, as I'm doing here. But even with this monitor, which is a relatively new and sharp one, the filter may still actually make it look better. Old graphics with low resolution and limited palettes just look better most of the time when they're a little bit blurry and washed out. It just hides the jagged edges of the pixels. And if we're talking about genuine old games, when the artists were making their artwork, they were looking at a blurry CRT monitor, and they drew what they did just to look good on that. Older versions of the game only have the option of 4-color CGA emulation, but when it was released on Steam, an EGA mode was added with 16 colors. Now, a lot of people probably think the magentas and cyans of CGA are ugly and hard to look at. I can understand where they're coming from, but with my nostalgia goggles on, I like CGA and EGA mode both equally, and I tend to flip between them as the mood strikes me. But there's so much more to this game than just the amazing graphics. The gameplay achieves an equally accurate 80s experience, with a fair share of modern innovations thrown in as well, that nonetheless don't feel out of place. In that era, the term Metroidvania hadn't been coined yet, and Pittman tends to avoid that term himself when describing his game, preferring exploration. It wasn't an uncommon feature in games from 30 years ago, although perhaps less so in platformers. But being dropped right into the game with little information or direction was just something you had to expect back in the day. Here at least you're given a couple of simple signs and precisely 2.5 linear screens to act as your tutorial, and it's executed perfectly, allowing you to experiment with the controls and logic of the game in your own time and without being too pushy. But even here you're enticed by inaccessible ledges and areas that make you wonder wistfully if you'll ever get back here, and when you do, if you'll have some way to access these areas that are currently out of reach. And in short order, You'll have all sorts of branching paths thrust at you, including more deliciously frustrating shelves, nooks and branching tunnels that you can't quite get to. It feels daunting yet captivating, but in reality, the world map isn't really all that big, and it's laid out well enough that you generally don't spend too much time running in circles or getting hopelessly lost. Scattered about the map are little bells hanging from the wall, which act as checkpoints. Any time you die, you'll be brought back to the last bell you rang, and you will die. A lot. But don't worry, unlike a lot of games from the 80s, you have infinite lives. Unless you're playing one of the special modes, but I'll get into them. As you explore, you'll come across all sorts of dangerous creatures. Bats, snakes, crabs, prawns, and jellyfish for some reason. But with no attack moves at your disposal, all you can do is dodge them. But that's fine, as they all move or fire in simple and predictable patterns. And besides, this is a precision platformer, not a run and gun. And you'll see just how precise this platforming is when you run into your first, for want of a better word, boss. These are once-off baddies that fire hails of bullets about the screen. But again, the patterns are entirely preset and predictable. But don't think that makes them easy to get past. These bullets are thick and fast. Each boss acts as a guardian to one of the 4 power-ups in the game. 2 of the power-ups, in the form of shining orbs, activate ghost blocks, the outlines of which you will see here and there but can't stand on, and the other 2 power-ups affect your movement, one giving you a double jump and the other a wall slide. These 2 are considered staples of gaming these days, but I think they count among the modern additions in this game, as you'll hardly see a single game with either one until the late 90s or even early 2000s. But they are welcome additions, as they add to the smooth, fluent gameplay that sets this apart from some of the more stodgy platformers of the 80s. It's these natural and responsive controls that make the platform gameplay so sizzlingly tight. If you're not going for 100% completion, and you're playing on the normal mode, you'll run into a small but significant share of really tricky platforming sections, but nothing impossible for a patient player, since it throws you back into the game at the last bell almost straight away without any long animation or delays. Some of them will kill you quite a few times though, like this bit, and this bloody bit. Ooh yeah, and this bit. But there's plenty more bastards of rooms if you want to find all the coin bags, like this freaking bit, and this damn bit. And if you want to try the extra spicy mode, there's even more difficult bits to fray your nerves, like this bit, and this bit, and this, and you know what? The whole extra spicy mode is just one giant prick of a thing. But it's incredibly satisfying when you finish it, because all the platforming, no matter how hard, is perfectly fair. There are no random number generators, no hidden spikes or death traps, and the controls are tight and responsive. And if you're a real show-off, there's 2 additional modes, Cat Mode and YOLO Mode, which only give you limited lives to play with. Now, you're probably thinking that YOLO sounds a little bit anachronistic here, and you'd be right. In addition to the modern gameplay tweaks, there's a handful of modern pop culture references thrown into the text description at the bottom of the screen, which you may find to lessen your immersion, and I have to admit it's not exactly my cup of tea, but they're all fairly minor nods and winks, and they're not really that intrusive. And I'm sure there's plenty of players that like those little kind of jokes as well. All in all, there are few games with this amount of confidence and polish that are also completely free. If the authentic look and feel give you flushes of longing nostalgia, or you just like hard-as-nails precision platforming, then this game is for you. It's one of my favourite games, especially of the last 10 years or so, and if it sounds in any way up your alley, I highly recommend you give it a try. Now, if somebody could just go and make a proper 8-bit DOS port.